continuing on page 197, we're talking about the evolution of programming languages and how this last category is a little hokey, but it's okay. It's good enough. One of the things that we need to talk about is this issue called object-oriented programming. And this is a term that's kind of thrown about, but let me just describe a little bit. Their little diagram doesn't do it any good. What this really means is object-oriented programming is designed to make reusable parts. If you have a big project and you just break it up into smaller chunks, I can perhaps reuse this chunk in another application. I developed it for this one, but later on I'm developing some similar application. I go, wait a minute, didn't I do that before? And I can just go grab this thing and make it plug and play. That's part of the appeal. But another ability is if I have a big project and I break it up into, let's say I have 4 employees, 4 programmers. I could break it up into 4 pieces and give each programmer an individual piece. And they can work on it independently. And if it's done right, employee number 3 doesn't have to wait for an employee number 1 to do his or her part. So from a business perspective, and let's say that, you're a businessman here, you're not a programmer, you like object-oriented programming because it allows you to spread the load out and get the project done faster. Because without object-oriented programming, it's always going to be, well, I can't do my part because, Bob hadn't done his part yet. That kind of crap. So object-oriented programming is designed basically to break things into smaller pieces, assign them to many people as you want, and then have reusable parts. So it's kind of a business kind of a thing if you think about it. Yes, it's a programming philosophy, but it's also a business thing. Okay, let's continue. The next thing to talk about is I've got bugs in my software. Yes. If you're not in the business, you might think, well, bugs are just kind of annoying. Yeah, that's true. But it's more to that. What people have to do is they have to look at the incoming things telling them that there's things that are wrong, and then store them up, because there's an awful lot of software out there that they'll fix a bug in version 4, and then they'll produce version 5, and that same bug reappears a second time. It's called a regression bug, because they didn't record it, they just fixed it and so they fixed it in version 4, but they were in the middle of writing version 5, and nobody over here said, oh, by the way, I just made a fix. You need to incorporate that fix in the new version. That didn't happen. So the most important thing about bugs is bug tracking. In fact, there's software out there called, one of them that I'm familiar with is called Bugzilla. And Bugzilla, its sole purpose in life is when bugs come in and feature requests come in, they're all recorded, and I can assign them to a person. So a person is responsible for fixing that, tracking that, making sure that happens. So it's all about tracking this stuff. I have software out there that automatically tells me when there's a bug. So for example, Android software. I go to my Android developers console, and it will tell me how many times there was a crash, or a did not respond, kind of a different type of crash. And it gives me feedback, and I can go there and go, wow, well, that's kind of weird. Let me go fix that. So I even if the customer never sent me an email saying, wow, your silly program crashed, I still know about it. I still know every time it crashes and every time there's a problem, so I can go in and fix. So software bugs is kind of business. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is licensing. And there's lots of different types of licensing. So they show different categories here. And one of the categories is single user license. And there's lots of subtypes of that. But basically, single user license means you are allowed to, this license is granted to a single person. Perpetual license basically means I can install this, subscription, which means it's only good for a year. That's a good one. A freeware, which means you can do whatever the heck you want with it. Shareware, which means I typically have like a trial period, and then I have to pay money. Then there's individual or multi-user licensing. And this was where I go in and I say, I'm going to allow you to install this up to 10 times. And that's it. So a certain number of computers. Now, it could be that it was designed for a certain number of users, or it could be a certain number of computers. So like you had a single machine, but you had 3 shifts, right, installed at one time, but I got 3 people using it, not all at the same time, not concurrently. The other one is called concurrent licensing, which means I don't care how many times you have it installed, and I don't care how many people you got, but you can't have more than 10 people using it at the same time, a concurrent license. And then you have, server and number of seats. Seats is how many machines. And then there's a weird one talks about per processor. Oracle, when they first came out, I think they probably weren't the first, but they were the ones that I am familiar with, is when you install Oracle software and you have 4 processors on your machine, the license is for 4 processors. And if you had a machine with 8 processors, you would actually pay more because your machine was more powerful. Kind of weird. All right. So different types. Single user kind of way of thinking, a machine license, a multi-user license, and concurrent licenses. And of course, 365 is kind of one of those where I pay a subscription service, and it doesn't really matter how many people, but I can install it up to 5 devices in my household. So as long as I'm in my household and have 5 devices, it doesn't matter if I have 10 kids or 2 kids. So that's kind of cool. The next thing you talk about is the free world. So freeware and open source. Some people combine this together, called free and open source software, FOSS. Doesn't always have to be that. Free doesn't mean necessarily open source. For example, Adobe Reader is free, okay? But are they going to give me the source code so I can go in and look at that? No, they're not. So this is proprietary software. And the idea is that the more people that have this software, the more likely you are to buy their full product. Okay, so it kind of makes sense to them. So there's lots of good stuff out there. In the open source example, I mean, this is where typically it's cost you nothing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that. But Linux and Firefox and MySQL and OpenOffice and all these other people are excellent systems that don't cost you any money. Now the problem here is if I'm in the middle of MySQL and I have to ask a question, there really isn't a company to ask. I mean, there's a group of developers scattered all over the planet, and there's probably some website somewhere that has a whole bunch of hints and helpful kind of bits of information. But if I'm going to go fuss at somebody, there's not somebody there necessarily. So free and open source. They talk about licensing. One of the more popular licenses for the open source stuff is called the GNU Public License. Okay, GNU Public License. And one of the cool things is what the abbreviation GNU stands for. That's kind of cool. I might ask you that. And there are a crazy bunch of people, and instead of having copyright, they actually have this thing called copyleft, and they're just trying to be funny. So it's their version of a copyright, and they've gone through several different versions, but it lists reasonable things you can do. For example, yes, I can copy this software as long as I don't modify it, and yes, I can give it to someone else. And yes, I can do all instead of being listing of things that you can't do, it basically tells you the things that you can do, which is pretty cool. And most people don't get any enjoyment out of reading copyright agreements, but you probably need to read a copyleft. It's actually pretty good. It's kind of humorous. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is software updates. Almost all pieces of software out there need to be updated periodically. Windows software isn't any better than some of the others. Here's a good Trivial Pursuit question. If I'm on my Windows machine and I go to software updates, is it going to update everything on my machine? No. It's only going to update the operating system and other Microsoft products. So if I have Adobe Flash, Microsoft Update isn't going to touch Adobe Flash. It's not going to touch Acrobat. It's not going to touch all the rest of the software that I have on my machine. It's only going to do its own products. So you really need a third-party piece of software to go in there and do more What I use is a piece of software called CISK450. CISK450 is it's a free piece of software you can download. It's CISK450.com. And all it does is go in and looks at your entire machine, not just the Microsoft part, and tell you that, okay, now, your version of Adobe is out of date. I'm not going to wait for that to happen. Let me continue on. But the takeaway here is Microsoft Update is only going to do a portion of your machine. If there's other security issues out there, you're on your own. You probably need a third party. And there's lots of them out there. There's one called, I don't remember, this goofy thing. Don't remember. But there's lots of third-party software that can help you do that. Global software support. We're going to be talking about this in the upcoming chapter, but let's say, for example, that you have a piece of software that's being used all over the world. Okay, so I need a support mechanism that can handle different languages, different time zones, and, website that's in lots of different languages, telephone support. And most people just, before globalization, most people just had their own support mechanism. They had, a couple people in the back room that answered the phone. That was it. Now that's just not possible. So most people contract out support, telephone support, and all those kind of things, because I can have it cover the entire globe. I can have it in 15 languages. We're operating 24/7 because the world never sleeps. And anyway, that's just how that works. Okay, we have reached the end of the chapter. I will see you guys again in some future chapter.